What's going on, Auburn fans? Once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart here for the podcast talking Auburn football. It's week 5 of the college football season. Go ahead and like this video, comment, and subscribe to Vernon Speak Sports Auburn. As always, it's great to be an Auburn Tiger or Eagle. Auburn finds themselves as a 4-0 team for the first time since 2014. Most of us remember that year. Auburn got off to a fast start at 5-0. But wound up dropping 5 of the last 8 games to go 8-5, including a nail-biter against Wisconsin, a shootout against Alabama that ended 55-14, and a just no-call, no-show against Georgia that didn't end so well. And then games like, say, Texas A&M that year, ending on a fumble snap where Auburn looked to be driving for a touchdown. Those are the little things that cost you and that can turn a promising season into an 8-5 season, which is why I think where Auburn is at this point is, trending off to a good start. One of the things that we want to look at is the Auburn defense. We talked about the Auburn defensive line as possibly being the number 1 defensive line in the country. They're definitely trending towards that way. Because when you look at Derrick Brown and Marlon Davidson and then the emergence of Tyrone Truesdale, Coinus Miller, and Big Cat Bryant, Nick Cole, those guys are really starting to solidify themselves as a very solid unit for the Auburn Tigers. Even in games that appeared to be kind of close, Kevin Steele was still able, Rodney Garner still able to rotate these guys out and get them the necessary reps that they needed to have the experience and the depth factor going into what we now are in, which is the gauntlet. The gauntlet seems a little bit more manageable now because you look at a nice win over Oregon. Don't take anything away from that Oregon win, because since Oregon has lost to Auburn, they have not allowed a touchdown since that time. And they've outscored the teams that they played in an insurmountable fashion. Big shout out to the Oregon Ducks. Wish them well in the Pac-12, as they are already cannibalizing themselves, though, because most of the teams in the Pac-12 already have losses. And if there's any, hope for the Pac-12 to make it to the college football playoffs, California, who I think is the only team that's undefeated in that conference, would have to win out, and that is not of high likelihood. You might not see a Pac-12 team in the college football playoff again this year. Oregon, however, has an opportunity. I think they have the most upside overall, the most balance of a team in the Pac-12, but we will just have to wait and see. Kevin Steele's defense is definitely on schedule for all the goals that they set to meet on this year. Because you talk about last year, giving up 3.7 running yards per carry, also 6+ yards per play offensively. Already pacing towards 3.1 yards per carry and 5.56, somewhere around there, per offensive play. The reason why this is so significant is because if we think about this time last year, allowing all of these yards per play and yards per carry, already Auburn is a 1-loss team, and that to LSU 22-21 on last season. We all remember the busted play with Deshaun Davis that resulted, and also the poor angle by Daniel Thomas that resulted in that late score that brought LSU within 2, which allowed them to actually win that game by 1 point with the walk-off field goal. That changed the whole trajectory of Auburn's season. In my opinion, I don't think Auburn played the same intensity-wise for the rest of the year. Kind of getting it together and salvaging a very unlikely win against Texas A&M to have a somewhat respectable season to end off. You look at this defensive line for the Auburn Tigers, already are showing shades as to why the media outlets ranked Auburn among the top 10 in the country. You talk about Marlon Davidson, and now Derrick Brown has re-emerged as a force, because there were a couple of articles, guys, that came out this week that kind of sort of downgraded Derrick Brown. To say that, hey, maybe he's trending towards being a flop. Maybe, we can't feed into the hype the way we thought we should. I don't know if Derrick Brown read the articles. I don't know if Derrick Brown did some self-assessment or looked himself in the mirror, did some soul searching. But he definitely emerged into the force that we felt that he needed to be to have some serious impact on this Auburn team. You're talking about 3 tackles for a loss. You're talking about 2 sacks and almost an interception. Very, very likely of what Nick Fairley used to do. We made the comparisons of Nick Fairley to Derrick Brown, and Derrick Brown definitely showed shades of that in the Texas A&M game. I mean, a dominant force. Even with the double teams, he still managed to be a disruptive force in this football game. Marlon Davidson, 2 weekends in a row, Marlon Davis garnished the Defensive Lineman of the Week award. What does that translate into? That translates into some sound defense. Auburn's only allowing 15 points per game. They're only allowing 89 rushing yards per game. The only hole that I saw here this week with, Texas A&M having to rely on true freshman Isaiah Spiller as the primary running back in this game, it caused Texas A&M's offense to be one-dimensional. So guess what? They started to pass the ball a little bit more, and I think this is something that the Auburn secondary wasn't accustomed to, and something that they're definitely going to have to go back to film and really dissect on how to defend, especially the back shoulder throw, and also plays across the middle were becoming too open. And also, although Auburn is only allowing 32% of their third downs, I think Texas A&M was a little bit too successful. They had about 23 first downs in this particular game, and that's a trend that hurt Auburn on last year. So this is something going into the Mississippi State game that Auburn wants to get a handle on, wants to get an eye on. There's a chance that there could be a true freshman quarterback playing against Mississippi State. Playing against Auburn for Mississippi State. That's becoming a thing now. Teams are having to rely on these true freshman quarterbacks right off the gate, just like, Bo Nix here at Auburn, already 4-0. Not the most statistically impressive start for Bo Nix, but at the same time, he has done a great job of managing this particular football team, responding when he needs to, doing exactly what he's been asked to do. Didn't pass much. I think 12 for 20 last week for 100 yards, but they were very effective. And also, one thing I started to notice with Bo Nix is that he was very effective in the run-pass option. I think he made some great reads in that run-pass option. He made some effective runs, 4 or 5 yards, then maybe broke one for about 10. Bo Nix is not being asked to do the same thing that Nick Marshall or Cam Newton was asked to do. As a matter of fact, he shouldn't have to. Cam Newton and Nick Marshall pretty much had to do that, especially Cam Newton. You take Cam Newton out of the equation in 2010, and that is a totally different season for the Auburn Tigers. You might be talking about 8-5. You might be talking about even worse if Cam Newton didn't have the heroics to take the team on his shoulder as he did without he had limited talent at the receiver position. I thought Darvin Adams was great, but Darvin Adams wasn't that particular game-breaking receiver like, say, Seth Williams is, or Anthony Schwartz, or guys of that nature. So I think Bo Nix is in a great position. Also, I'm really liking what, Coach Gus Malzahn is starting to implement even with Joey Gatewood. I knew pretty soon that Joey Gatewood would come in and emerge as a threat in the Wildcat situation. But see, here's the thing. When Boobie Whitlow comes into the game, it's a Wildcat situation. But when Joey Gatewood comes into the game, it's a quarterback in the football game. So that means the playbook is wide open. It's not a situation where the quarterback is going to receive the snap and he's automatically going to run to the right or to the left. No, it's a situation just like in the red zone against Texas A&M. The playbook was wide open. Nice pass to the tight end. Touchdown, Auburn. So that's something that you want to, that you could probably look forward to out of Joey Gatewood going into the middle of the season. I think that was a huge statement. I think Auburn is slowly starting to show some things from an offensive standpoint. And it was really nice to see the diversity starting to happen with the Auburn Tigers. You talk about getting Anthony Schwartz involved, Seth Williams involved, saw some J.J. Wilson involved, also Harold Joyner. Although he coughed the ball up, luckily he recovered that fumble, because that would have been a difference maker in that particular football game. But you're starting to see a lot more diversity that we expected to see from the Auburn Tigers against Texas A&M as we start to shift our focus towards Mississippi State. Now, back to the defense, though. Talk about a team that's only giving up 15 points per game. Really, really stellar at stopping the run. A couple of guys that I'm especially, really, really impressed with is KJ Britt and Christian Tutt. These guys have really played next level for the Auburn Tigers and have been very consistent. KJ Britt had, many tackles he had a couple of solo tackles, a few, more than a few solo tackles, but he comes up big when it counts the most. You think about what he did again in the Oregon game. You think about what he's done up to this point. He's been a mainstay for this particular defense and has been the perfect heir for Deshaun Davis. Deshaun Davis was great inside of the tackle box. But one thing I like about KJ Britt is his game is effective not only from sideline to sideline, but he can also cover in the intermediate passing game. And to have guys like Owen Papo supplementing Zacoby McClain, really helping out with that. I think the upgrades at the linebacker position is a key reason why this Auburn defense is clicking the way that they are and why they are 4-0 and the number 7 team right now in the country. No one expected this. No one saw this coming. But when you really look at the totality of circumstance for the Auburn Tigers, you got to think about it. I told you guys before. I told you guys this summer. You're talking about an overlap of talent from a recruiting standpoint. These guys, the guys on this team date all the way back to the 2015 season. The whole offensive line, 2015. Derrick Brown, Marlon Davis, and all those guys have been around the program for multiple years. Daniel Thomas, Jeremiah Denson have been around the program for a couple of years. Joey Gatewood and his squad from 2017 been around. 2017 have been around the program for some years. 2018, those guys, Christian Tutt and all those guys are starting to emerge for the Tigers. So that's what you're seeing. And if Auburn continues to recruit well, then that's a trend that you will see to where it won't take 4 years for Auburn to have a good team. They will start to close the gap to where it's every other year. And then it's going to get to the point where the talent is stacked up to where Auburn is in the same position that Georgia, LSU, Alabama are in, to where they are reloading instead of rebuilding. That's all recruiting. It has nothing to do with coaching. That's all recruiting. Strategic recruiting, and Auburn is getting off to a good start because where you build your roster and where you reload your roster is not necessarily targeting all those 5 stars, those guys that can be babies at times and want to transfer just because they're not getting playing time. You build your roster with those 4-star recruits, those 98s, those close to 99 recruits, and then you taper off down to the 92. You don't want to get too far into the 80s because you wind up with guys like, no offense to the guy, I think he had a great career at Auburn, but then you get all these feel-good stories like Deshaun Davis. And when big plays are needed to be made, those guys can't make them. And the numbers don't lie. They've been using this numerical system for some years, so the numbers don't lie. But anyway, I think Auburn has gotten off to an incredible start. I think they're right where they need to be from a developmental standpoint. They're starting to really ease the playbook in to where, you're starting to get a glimpse of what the identity of this team could look like. Talking about taking on Mississippi State, this game has been somewhat of a nemesis-type game for the Auburn Tigers, not as successful against Mississippi State in recent years as Auburn would have liked to overall, especially when the stakes are high. Okay. And, you talk about a team that typically Auburn should beat, because you look at the way that Mississippi State recruits, is really, for the most part, for a lack of a better way of putting it, no sound excuse as to why Auburn should lose to a team like Mississippi State. We're going to have some more information talking about Mississippi State. And, they have a situation where they may be relying on a true freshman quarterback. We'll see how that turns out. But anyway, great start for the Auburn Tigers. You're talking 4-0, number 7 in the country, starting to be in the conversation as a team that could be a contender down the stretch. Once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart here for the podcast talking Auburn football. Go ahead and like this video, comment, and subscribe to Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn. As always, it's great to be an Auburn Tiger War Eagle.